She wasn't there to make a statement, just to grab a meal. But when the staff turned their backs, what Jasmine Crockett did in response didn't just silence the room, it left the entire town rethinking what strength really looks like. It started with a wrong turn. Jasmine Crockett had been on the road for almost 3 hours. Her driver, following GPS directions, to a small community meeting just outside Abilene. The event was low profile, no cameras, no big headlines, just her meeting with a group of local educators and small business owners. But somewhere along Route 83, the GPS cut out, and they missed the exit. By the time they figured it out, everyone was tired and hungry, and Jasmine, never one to complain, simply said, "Let's stop somewhere and eat. Doesn't matter where." They pulled into a roadside diner just outside the town of Ballinger. The sign out front said Stevie Ray's Smokehouse, Family, Faith, Freedom in faded red letters, with a massive American flag mural painted across one side of the building. The parking lot was filled with pickup trucks. An older couple sat on a bench outside, talking quietly over styrofoam coffee cups. Jasmine wasn't dressed like someone trying to blend in. A sleek navy pantsuit, heels that had seen better days, and a simple gold necklace. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She looked polished, but tired, the kind of tired that comes from being stretched thin, one hand in Congress, the other in the community. As she stepped out of the car, she caught a few sideways glances from the folks outside, not aggressive, just curious or cautious, maybe both. Inside it smelled like slow-cooked ribs and coffee. The AC hummed. Every head in the room turned toward her and her aide, Devin, a tall, wiry guy in his 30s who always wore black. Jasmine clocked the room instantly. Cowboy hats, MAGA caps, a wall plastered with military patches, and framed photos of Trump. One TV played Fox News on mute, the other showed local high school football highlights. Nobody said anything, not at first. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes met Jasmine's, and something flickered. Not surprise, not recognition. Something colder. Jasmine smiled. "Anyway, hi there, table for two." The woman didn't move, didn't blink. A man at the bar, bald, stocky, mid-60s, chuckled under his breath, "Think y'all might be better off somewhere else." Devin shifted beside her, uncomfortable. "We're just looking for something quick to eat," he said. The woman finally spoke. "We're a private business. We reserve the right to refuse service." She said it like she'd practiced, like she'd said it before. Jasmine stood still, her hands gently clasped in front of her. She didn't ask why, she didn't raise her voice. She just looked at the woman for a moment and then glanced around the room. Eyes flicked away. Conversation stopped. A teenage boy wearing a camo jacket froze with a chicken tender halfway to his mouth. "Okay," Jasmine said softly. "Thanks anyway." She turned to leave, but as she stepped away, she noticed a laminated sign near the door, big letters, bold font. It read, "We support law enforcement, the Second Amendment, and free speech. No masks, no excuses." She paused. Not to argue, not to protest, torment, just long enough to read it. Then she opened the door, but before she stepped out, she glanced back at the room. Still no one speaking. The silence was heavier than before. Devin muttered, "Let's go," but Jasmine lingered for just another breath. She looked directly at the woman behind the counter. "You have a good day?" There was no sarcasm in her voice, no edge, only composure. But as the door closed behind her, a girl no older than 20 stood up from the far corner booth with a look in her eyes that said she'd seen something different. And that's where the shift began. Outside, the heat pressed down hard. Jasmine didn't say much as she walked back to the car. Devin opened the door for her, but hesitated before getting in. He looked back toward the diner and shook his head. "You want to report them?" he asked. "I can call someone. This isn't legal." Jasmine sat down, adjusted her jacket, and looked out the window. "No," she said, "not today." Inside the diner, the room stayed quiet longer than usual. Conversations didn't resume right away. Forks scraped plates without the usual clatter. The woman behind the counter, her name tag read C. Lorraine, returned to wiping the countertop, but her hand moved slower. The man at the bar leaned back and muttered, "Well, that was awkward." No one answered from the back booth. The young woman who had stood up, Heather Briggs, a part-time waitress and nursing student, walked toward the counter, pausing by a table of older men along the way. "You didn't have to do that," she said, almost whispering. One of the men looked up. "She didn't belong here. You know how folks are." Heather kept walking at the counter. She lowered her voice. She was polite. "Miss Lorraine, she didn't cause any trouble." C. Lorraine didn't look up. "You think she came in here by accident? That's politics, Heather. She's a politician. Don't be naive." Heather stood silently for a second, lips pressed together. She'd worked at Stevie Ray's for 2 years. Tips were good, hours steady. Her father had told her not to ruffle feathers if she wanted to keep her job. But something about the way that woman Jasmine stood there saying thank you after being turned away like that, it had shaken her just a little. Meanwhile, back in the car, Jasmine was checking her phone, making sure they wouldn't be late to the meeting. In Winters, she wasn't angry, not visibly, but Devin knew her well enough to recognize the silence meant she was doing math in her head, measuring how much the moment had taken from her, how much it was worth, and whether to let it go. You've had people yell at you before, Devin said, but that was different. Jasmine glanced at him. Yeah, she said, because they thought they were making a point. She reached for a bottle of water in the door pocket. Her hand shook. Just slightly across town at the local feed store, a man named Buck Langley, the same guy who'd muttered at the counter, was retelling the story to a friend, adding some exaggeration about how she came in acting all-important. Word spreads fast in places like Ballinger. By the time lunch hour ended, the story had already changed hands 3 times, but Heather kept thinking about Jasmine, the way she spoke, the way she left during her break. She pulled out her phone and typed in the name Jasmine Crockett. Up came headlines: Congresswoman, civil rights attorney, member of the House. She scrolled through photos, speeches, hearings, a video clip of her standing her ground during a committee grilling, different from how she was in the diner there. She had stood still, quiet but strong. Heather suddenly felt small and unsure. Back at the diner, an elderly couple walked in and sat near the window. See, Lorraine handed them menus without a smile. Busy morning, the old man asked. Lorraine gave a half shrug. Had a visit from one of those liberal politicians. Oh yeah, he said. What did she want? Nothing, apparently. They laughed a little, but it wasn't really funny. Something about it hung in the air out in the parking lot. Jasmine hadn't left yet. She was staring at the steering wheel, her thoughts far away. She hadn't come looking for confrontation. She hadn't expected praise. She just wanted a sandwich. But what she got instead was a window into something deeper, something that had nothing to do with barbecue. But before she could finish that thought, there was a tap at the car window, and standing there was someone she didn't expect to see again. Heather didn't plan to follow her out. She hadn't even realized she was moving until she was already pushing through the heavy glass door of the diner. The heat slapped her again, but she didn't care. Her apron was still tied around her waist, her order pad sticking out of her pocket. She stood there, feet awkwardly planted on the asphalt, staring at the parked car. Just a few steps away, Jasmine rolled down the window. They looked at each other for a second, 2 women generations apart, from very different places. Neither spoke. First, then Heather cleared her throat. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, that wasn't right. Jasmine didn't smile, but her expression softened. You don't have to apologize for other people's choices. Heather nodded slowly. I know, it's just they shouldn't have treated you like that. Devin leaned forward in his seat, unsure whether to intervene, but Jasmine gently lifted a hand, signaling him to let it be. She looked at Heather, really looked at her. The girl was nervous, shifting her weight from foot to foot, probably scared someone inside might see her and make a scene, but she came out anyway. You work there long? Jasmine asked. 2 years, since I was 18, saving up for nursing school. Heather brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. It's good money, I guess. Better than nothing. Jasmine stepped out of the car. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move closer. She just stood straight, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. I'm not surprised by what happened in there, she said. That kind of thing, it doesn't hit me the same way it used to. But what surprises me is people like you. Heather's brows pulled together. You had nothing to gain coming out here. In fact, you probably just made things harder for yourself, but you did it anyway. Heather looked down. I don't know. I just felt like if I didn't say anything, then I was part of it. There was a pause. You ever been called names? Jasmine asked. Suddenly, Heather blinked. What, has anyone ever looked at you and decided they already knew everything about you, what you believe, what you're worth? Heather hesitated. I guess maybe. Not like that. Not the way you meant. Jasmine gave a small nod. Then let me tell you something. That moment inside, it wasn't about food. It wasn't even about me, really. It was about fear, fear wrapped in pride. Heather didn't respond. Jasmine continued. People cling to what they think makes them strong. Flags, slogans, signs, and windows. But real strength is standing alone when it would be easier to follow. Heather looked away, eyes glassy. Jasmine's tone softened again. What's your name? Heather. Well, Heather, you just stood up straighter than half the people I've ever met in DC. Heather let out a shaky breath. That small, quiet sentence did something to her, the kind of sentence that sits with you long after it's said. From inside the diner, someone opened the door and yelled, Heather, you taking your break? Or what? She flinched, startled. I gotta go, she said. Jasmine gave her a nod. Take care of yourself. Heather turned back halfway to the door, then stopped. I don't know if it matters, she said, but I think you carry yourself the way a real leader should. Then she slipped back inside. Jasmine got back in the car. Finally, Devin didn't say anything right away. But as he pulled onto the road again, he glanced in the mirror. That was something. Jasmine didn't answer. She looked out the window as the diner grew smaller behind them. But inside that diner, Heather was about to do something no one saw coming. and it would change the tone of the entire room. Back inside, Heather's shoes squeaked faintly on the tile. As she returned to the counter, Lorraine didn't even look up. She just slapped a fresh order slip onto the turnstile and called into the kitchen too. Brisket platters, 1 extra slaw. Heather tied her apron back on, forcing her expression into something neutral, but her chest was tight. She passed a table of 3 middle-aged men, regulars. They stopped talking. When she walked by, she heard one mutter, "Little Miss woke out there, making friends." Heather pretended not to hear. At the counter, she grabbed a tray and started setting out drinks for a new table, but her hands were moving too fast. One of the cups tipped, splashing sweet tea across the laminate. Lorraine shot her a sharp look. Careful. Heather grabbed a rag, wiping it down without a word, but something in her cracked. She set the rag down slowly and looked straight at Lorraine. "Why'd you do it?" Lorraine paused mid-swipe of the register. "Excuse me, that woman. She came in. She was polite, didn't cause any trouble." "Why'd you treat her like that?" The room didn't go silent, at least not completely, but enough folks heard to make it matter. 2 tables nearby went quiet. One of the cooks peeked out from the kitchen. Lorraine sighed, like a parent tired of repeating themselves. "Heather, I told you we have the right people like that come in here stirring things up. Next thing you know, we're on the news." She didn't say a word about politics. Heather said she didn't say anything except thank you. Lorraine set the rag down with a thump. "You want to lose your job over this?" Heather felt her throat close up for a second. She thought about backing down, letting it go, maybe apologizing, but her feet didn't move. "I don't want to lose my job," she said, "but I don't want to be the kind of person who pretends that was okay." Someone at the corner booth coughed. Another man at the bar raised his eyebrows, clearly entertained, but nobody jumped in. Nobody defended Heather either. Lorraine stared at her, jaw tight. "You want to work here? You follow how we do things?" Heather nodded slowly. "I've followed everything for 2 years, but today wasn't right, and you know it." She turned and walked away, unsure of what she'd just done or what it would cost her. She finished out her shift without saying much else, took orders, cleared plates, smiled out of habit, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting Jasmine to come back, even though she knew that wouldn't happen. In the back, she scrolled through Jasmine's name again on her phone. Her hands hovered over the screen. Then she opened her notes app. She started typing. It wasn't a rant, not some performative post, just a few thoughts, a recounting of what she saw, what was said, what she felt that night. After closing, Heather posted it on a small blog she kept mostly for herself, a handful of followers, nursing students, friends from school. She didn't think much of it, but she didn't know who was reading. Meanwhile, back in the motel room outside Winters, Jasmine was reviewing notes for the meeting. Devin sat across from her, scrolling through his own phone. "Hey," he said suddenly, "you seeing this?" He passed her the phone. There it was, Heather's post. Her name wasn't in it, but the story was unmistakable. It was spreading quickly, not viral, but enough that people outside that small town were paying attention. Jasmine read it silently, her expression unreadable. Then finally, she set the phone down and looked at Devin. She didn't have to do that, no, Devin said, but she did. But Jasmine didn't know that Heather's decision was about to ripple far beyond a blog post, because the next morning someone else was going to speak up too. The next morning started like any other, coffee brewed behind the counter at Stevie Ray's. The regulars filed in. Some talked about the local high school game, others argued about fuel prices. No one mentioned what had happened the day before, at least not out loud, but it hung there quietly like dust that hadn't settled. Lorraine moved stiffly behind the counter. She hadn't said much since closing. No apology, no explanation, just more of the same business as usual. But something was different. At 9:12 a.m., a man named Kenneth Darrow walked in. Retired farmer, longtime customer, white beard, flannel tucked into pressed jeans. Everyone knew Kenny. He'd been coming to the diner since before it changed names 3 times. He took his seat at the window, ordered his usual 2 eggs, hash brown, sausage links. Heather poured his coffee. Without a word, he watched her for a second. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm okay." He tapped the edge of his mug. "You were brave yesterday." Heather blinked. "I didn't do much round here," he said. "Just saying, something can feel like climbing a mountain." Heather looked down at the floor, unsure how to respond. A few minutes later, after his plate arrived, Kenny set his fork down and pushed his chair back slightly. He cleared his throat. The diner didn't exactly go silent, but the noise dimmed enough. "I saw what happened yesterday," he said, not shouting, just firm. "I've known Lorraine a long time. We don't always agree, but I've never seen her turn someone away like that." Lorraine stood behind the counter, her arms crossed. Kenny didn't stop. That woman didn't come in looking for a fight. She didn't carry a camera crew. She just walked in hungry. Someone in the back muttered something under his breath. Kenny turned toward him. "You got something to say, say it. Otherwise, let me speak." Nobody said anything. "I don't know much about politics," Kenny continued, "but I know what manners look like, and that woman had more dignity than Some of the folks calling themselves patriots in. Here a few people shifted in their seats. She said thank you after being refused service. That tells me something. Lorraine's lips were tight. You don't understand. Kenny, people like her, they stir up trouble. It's not about dignity, it's about what's best for this place. He gave her a long look. What's best for this place is decency. That landed harder than expected. Heather's chest rose slowly. She wasn't the only one who felt it. From another booth, a man who hadn't spoken all morning raised his hand like he was in church. I didn't like what I saw. Either. Then another chimed in, then someone else. It wasn't loud, there were no speeches, just scattered acknowledgments, small but deliberate. Nobody was calling for protests, nobody said the word boycott. But the mood had shifted. Lorraine said nothing, and when Kenny finished his breakfast, he walked to the counter, left a $10 tip, and looked Heather in the eye. You did something good, she smiled. Just a little. By noon, word had spread again, not online this time, face to face. A few teachers from the local high school stopped by the diner. Out of curiosity, they ordered takeout, but made a point of being kind to Heather. A retired librarian left a note folded on the napkin dispenser. Grace matters. Don't forget that. Meanwhile, the blog post continued to circulate. Quietly, someone shared it in a Texas-based Facebook group. Then it ended up on a Reddit. Read about quiet acts of resistance. People didn't argue, they just read, and something strange started to happen. Not loud condemnation, not outrage, just reflection. But what no one expected was who would show up at the diner's door the very next day, and what he would ask for. The next day was quieter than usual at Stevie Ray's. Even the regulars spoke in softer tones, as if the air had shifted somehow. The news hadn't picked it up. No headlines, no interviews. But the story was moving on its own. Whispered across tables, passed from one phone screen to another. The power of a simple moment, the kind people don't forget. Just before noon, the bell above the door rang. Every head turned. A man walked in wearing jeans and a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled, broad-shouldered. Maybe late 40s, skin tanned from years outdoors. His name was Gideon Pratt, a ranch owner from a few towns over, known for being proud of two things: his land and his politics. He wasn't the kind of guy who kept to himself. People listened when he spoke, not because he demanded it, but because he meant every word, good or bad. He stood near the door for a second, scanning the room. Then he stepped forward and made his way toward the counter. Lorraine looked up, surprised. Gideon, I heard about what happened, he said. Just wanted to ask you something. Lorraine stiffened. What did she? Raise her voice. No. Did she insult anyone? No. Then why did you turn her away? Lorraine opened her mouth, then closed it again. Gideon didn't press. He just nodded slowly. Thought. So he turned toward Heather, who was frozen mid-step with a tray in her hands. You're the one who wrote that post? Heather hesitated. I didn't use names, didn't need to. He said it was honest, respectful, didn't make anyone a villain. I read it twice. She stood there, unsure what to say. I'm not changing my politics, he said, as if he needed to get that out of the way, but I know grace when I see it. And that lady had it. Then he did something no one expected. He sat down. Bring me whatever she was trying to order that day. He said, I'll pay double. And if you remember what seat she stood at, I'll sit there too. The room was still. Lorraine muttered, you're making a scene. No, he said calmly. You made a scene? I'm just trying to clean it up. Heather moved slowly to the back and placed the order herself. She didn't know what Jasmine wanted that day, but she guessed. Brisket sandwich, no sauce, side of slaw. Something simple. She served it to Gideon with her hands still shaking. He took one bite, wiped his mouth, and said, good food. Shame it didn't get served when it should have. A few patrons clapped softly, but sincerely, not for Gideon necessarily, but for what it all meant. Outside, someone snapped a photo through the diner window. Gideon sitting alone at the counter in the same spot Jasmine had stood. That image, without a caption, would be shared and reshared in places no one expected. Back on the road, Jasmine hadn't planned on thinking about that diner again. She had work to do, hearings to prep, calls to make. She'd moved on, or at least she told herself she had, until her phone buzzed with a message from Devin. You need to see this. Attached was the photo of Gideon at the diner, and the note he'd written on his napkin. You changed something. I just showed up late. Jasmine stared at it for a long time. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, but she whispered, all right then. But what happened afterward, what Heather did with that moment, and the person who reached out because of it, would carry the message even further. It took Heather 3 days to decide. She hadn't expected the photo of Gideon to go viral. It wasn't even her. Someone else had taken it, shared it without tagging her, and by the time she saw it, it had already made its way onto Twitter, TikTok, and even a few blogs. Most people didn't even know the full story, just fragments. A powerful woman denied service, a stranger sitting in her place. Days later, a waitress caught in the middle telling the truth without bitterness. Heather kept reading the comments, people praising Jasmine's composure, others sharing similar stories. A few trolls, sure, but not many. The tone had shifted, not toward outrage, but something else, something quieter, recognition. Maybe on the third night, Heather sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open. She stared at the email draft she'd been rewriting over and over. It was addressed to Repulong Jasmine Crockett. She kept it simple. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, I don't know if this will ever reach you. I'm just a waitress in a small Texas town. You probably didn't mean to stop in, but I saw what happened that day. I saw how you handled it, and I wanted you to know. Your silence said more than anyone's yelling could. You didn't try to shame us. You didn't try to make a point. You just walked out with grace. I've never seen someone carry that much power without using it to punish, and it changed something in me. I've started looking at people differently, listening, more judging, less. I just wanted to say thank you. You probably didn't come here expecting to make a difference, but you did with respect. Heather Briggs, she hit send before she could second-guess herself. Again, 3 days later, her phone buzzed. It wasn't an email, it was a call, unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code. She answered on the third ring. Hi, the voice said, warm and unmistakable. Is this Heather? Yes, this is Jasmine Crockett. Heather nearly dropped the phone. They spoke for 10 minutes. Jasmine asked about her studies, her job, how she was holding up. She didn't mention the blog post or the viral photo. She just wanted to know how Heather was doing. Before hanging up, Jasmine said something Heather would never forget. You were the only person in that room who saw me. Is more than a headline that takes courage. Heather didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, I think you're the one who taught me what courage actually looks like. That call didn't make the news. No one tweeted it, no press release. But 2 months later, Heather enrolled full-time at a community college nearby. She picked up weekend shifts and focused the rest of her time on school. Her old blog, she kept it going, but it changed. It became less about daily stress and more about small moments that meant something. Stories of kindness, people speaking up when they didn't have to. And as for the diner, Lorraine never apologized publicly, but she never pulled that "we reserve the right" line again. Either. She watched the shift happen around her, quiet, steady, undeniable. Fewer flags, more faces, different kinds of customers showing up, some of them local, some just passing through. And once, about 3 weeks later, a woman walked in wearing the same navy pantsuit. It wasn't Jasmine, but Lorraine served her anyway. No questions asked. Grace doesn't always show up in grand speeches. Sometimes it stands in silence, says thank you, and walks away. Sometimes it shows up 3 days later in the form of an email, and sometimes it shows up at a small-town diner disguised as a young waitress learning how to be brave. Let this be a reminder: character is contagious, and the way we treat each other when no one's watching matters the most. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe. More stories like this are on the way. Remember, you don't always need a loud voice to make a difference. Sometimes it's the calm, the kindness, and the way you treat others in quiet moments that shape the world around you. You don't have to be a politician to do what's right. Be kind, especially when it's hard. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. Stand firm, even if you're standing alone. The smallest actions, a simple thank you, a respectful glance, a quiet step outside, can change hearts, open minds, and inspire others to do the same. You never know who's watching, and you never know who might grow stronger because of your courage. If this story moved you, share it. Not to stir outrage, but to spread hope. Because change begins with one person, one action, one moment.